Hello and welcome to the Oregonian Sports Podcast, Apocalypse Edition. Brenna, Greene from KOIN 6 is here as always. And Brenna, we promised we'd be back this week to recap the weekend of college football that we had in store in the state of Oregon. And I can safely say that the two things I did not expect to be seeing on Saturday were the Beavers losing 9-7 to Idaho State at the end of the first quarter, and with 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter thinking, oh, the Ducks might lose to Idaho. So we have a lot to unpack about that. Obviously, the Ducks get some breaks down the stretch, handle the Vandals 24-14. The Beavers come around and take care of Idaho State too. But of course, the story is Oregon, and the Ducks looking extremely vulnerable against the Vandals from the Big Sky Conference. A very good FCS program, but a team that you still expected the Ducks to beat by a much more sizable margin. When did you start to worry about the Ducks, Brenna?
I had so much on my mind during that Oregon State game that it was like one of those things that was in the back of my brain, like, I wonder what's going on with Oregon, because I saw that they scored on the first drive, so I was like, all right, cool, like they're in business, they're good. And then I looked right before the end of the Oregon State game, and I was like, what? Like, what's going on here? And I actually told Skylar Thomas, who I interviewed after the game on the field while we were waiting there, I was like, yo, Oregon's only up by a touchdown right now, or whatever it was. It wasn't a lot.
Let me tell you, probably around that time, with 9:45 left in the fourth quarter, Idaho pulled the score to 17-14 on that second scoring drive when Jack Lane rushed it in from 4 yards. So it was a 3-point game with 9 minutes left. And not only was it a 3-point game with 9 minutes left, Oregon, the Vandals stopped Oregon on their next drive. They get the ball, into plus territory. They have 4th and 7, and it's field goal range, 4th and 7 field goal range. And you're thinking, Lanning brain, what's he do here? Sends the offense back out. And I mean, as much as we can criticize the Ducks offensive line from that game, because it was obviously the glaring weak spot, they got the Vandals to jump. And they got a defensive offsides on 4th and 7, which made it 4th and 2. I don't know if Lanning was ever actually going to go for it on 4th and 7, but he got the Vandals to jump. 4th and 2 sets up, a first down play, and then they go ahead and score, and that essentially seals the win. But we're in a game where, let's say the Ducks, send Automaticus Sappington out there, who actually missed a field goal in this game, and he kicks it through. It's a 6-point game, and the Vandals have the ball with 5 minutes to go. That is not a position I would have expected the Ducks to be in. So, a little bit of a near crisis. Crisis averted. Not entirely averted, though. Right before we started the podcast, the new coaches poll came out. The Ducks dipped from 3. They've been a pretty secure and stalwart number 3 in all of the preseason prognostications behind Georgia and Ohio State. They're now 6th in the coaches poll, and we'll see the AP poll a little bit later today. Brenna, you are a voter in the AP Top 25. You are the only voter in the state of Oregon with an AP vote. I mean, I'm not saying that that's 4th and 7 level pressure, but it's up there. What did you do with our mighty different Ducks?
Yeah, so I'm looking at this right now because I want to make sure. I'm trying to pull up all the AP Top 25 scores from this past weekend so that I can kind of go through with you how I did everything. Okay, there we go. So yeah, I was sitting here last night trying to figure this out. And I was like, all right, I mean, obviously Georgia and Ohio State stay. And then you look at the next few, Texas, they blasted a Colorado State team that could be pretty decent in the Mountain West. I mean, that was a 52-0. And then, Alabama 63-0, Ole Miss 76-0. And then, Notre Dame deserved to move up for the win over Texas A&M at Texas A&M.
Very good win.
So what I did was this. I went Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, Notre Dame, and I couldn't justify changing Alabama or Ole Miss's ranking, I felt like, because they had good games too. Mm-hmm. So I was like, I can't wedge Oregon before those two teams because that's technically penalizing those two teams and moving them down 2 spots, and that didn't make any sense to me. So I settled with Oregon at 7 and Penn State at 8. So there you go. Missouri and Michigan rounding out my top 10. So I put the Ducks 7th, and I was kind of sitting here last night trying to figure this out, and I'm like, wow, that feels like quite a drop for a team that didn't lose.
Yeah.
But I really couldn't figure out where else it made sense for me. That was just what made sense in my poll. And I didn't want to, like I said, I didn't want to penalize Alabama or Ole Miss and move them down because they took care of business and they handled business. And Oregon ultimately handled business. Did you see the video they came out with last night?
I did. Where Dan Lanning tells his team, very bluntly that he was disappointed by the performance, and he made a point of not the result but the process. And I thought it was interesting about that video, and Oregon fans should go check it out. I'm sure they've already watched it, most of them, but I did think it was interesting because we've heard so many of these things from Dan before, so many of the sort of catchphrases and platitudes.
Who are we playing?
We're playing Oregon every week. And he says that after big wins or when they, it's like, hey, wow, you were so much better in whatever this week than you were last week, or you were so good against UCLA. And he's always like, hey, we're playing Oregon. And you hear that and you kind of roll your eyes because it's coach speak. But you do kind of see the value of that after a game like the one they had on Saturday where, we need to measure ourselves against our own standard. And our standard obviously didn't get it done. And so I thought it resonated. I thought it was a sincere, I think Dan Lanning's a very good communicator. I think he's good at sort of connecting with players. And so I thought that was really strong. I wanted to, on your poll, I just wanted to say, I think you could have even dropped them lower.
Yeah.
And I think you could justify putting Penn State ahead of Oregon because Penn State had a really nice win over West Virginia, a Big 12 team, a Power 4 team on the road. I mean, that's a much tougher assignment than what Oregon had. Yeah. And so, you don't Florida State them. I'm looking at the coaches poll. Haven't totally had a chance to go through it, but the coaches poll, Florida State's out of the top 25 and is not receiving votes, which, I mean, yeah, how could you? I'm going to be curious to see what AP voters do with them. But I mean, that's not a top 25 team. You don't go 0-2 if you're a top 25 team. And so, that it's interesting. So not an AP voter here, but we do power rankings at the Oregonian. And so I obviously have to submit my, Big 10 power rankings. And, I've argued with people over the years over what a power ranking actually is, because I don't think it's a predicted order of finish. It's not, most likely to win the Big 10. But, you start looking at what Big 10 teams did, each, in week one, and maybe I'm overvaluing USC, but USC had the win of the week in the conference, right? So I put them at 2, Penn State at 3, Michigan at 4, Iowa at 5, and Oregon at 6 in the Big 10. And that's, again, power rankings. It's about momentum. It's about who's playing the best right now. So, and I feel fine about that. And it could change next week, but or in a couple of weeks. But Oregon has work to do to sort of restore the image that they came into the year with.
Well, the good news is they have a nice little opportunity to do that this week. If they come out and they hand it to Boise State, that's a nice looking win. That's the team that is, widely predicted to be the group of 5 team in the playoffs. If they're able to shut down that Boise State running back, Ashton Genty, I think that's yeah. If they're able to shut him down, all of a sudden everything's going to be hunky dory and just fine.
Yeah, but it's interesting because the Boise State game feels a little bit like a can't win game for the Ducks unless they just absolutely obliterate Boise State. Like, yes, that's a good team. It's a, like you said, the favorite for the group of 5 playoff spot. But I mean, did you see what the Broncos did in week 1? They needed everything that took to beat Georgia Southern.
Yep.
And like Georgia Southern, again, is a solid football program. It's an FBS school. It has been for the last couple of decades. But, you don't expect to look up in the fourth quarter and see Boise State, needing to, exactly, empty the clip to get past Georgia Southern. And so that was interesting. And I think that you've got two teams coming into week 2 who would really like to sort of reestablish who they are. And, if the Ducks do anything short of absolutely handle Boise State, like just blow them out of the water, blow their doors off, I think we're going to be having the same conversations because I don't know that beating Boise State 35-21 necessarily calms the concerns that are out there. You want to look absolutely dominant these first 3 weeks. I mean, the way the schedule lines up, Idaho, Boise State, Oregon State, that's an opportunity for the Ducks to, put some big numbers up, and it didn't happen in week 1. So I'm very curious to see what happens this week. I don't know if you read my column, Brenna.
I did.
But off the game on Saturday, because we're talking a lot about panic here. We're talking a lot about, the Ducks in free fall and absolute crisis. And we cannot overstate what a debacle it would have been if they had actually somehow lost to Idaho. I was in the press conference post game for Trent Bray and the Beavers after their win against Idaho State. And I've got the game up on my phone. Thanks DirecTV stream. And I'm just thinking, yes, I recognize that they could lose. Like, they could theoretically lose this game. There's a very clear path to victory for Idaho. I also never actually believed that the Ducks would not win.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that it couldn't have happened. I mean, the Ducks, look at how the Vandals were even in that position. The Ducks get stopped on 4th and inches, at the goal line. They get, they have a punt, a fake punt that's totally stymied, a missed field goal. There was just a lot of opportunities that if they'd gone, even one of those had gone the other way, we'd be talking about a much more comfortable cushion. But I just would say that I kind of always expected Oregon to hold on. But like I wrote, it doesn't have to be an actual upset to still be upsetting. So having said all that, it's upsetting, it's concerning. That said, isn't it just as plausible that we're going to get, into week 6 or, week 7 and be looking at this game as like this massive wake up call that shook the cage of a sleeping giant, and that the Ducks are the dominant team that we thought they were. The talent is all there. They're getting healthier along the offensive line, and maybe as early as this week. Isn't it just as plausible that instead of all these red flags that mean the Ducks aren't who we thought they were, that it's kind of going to turn them back into who we thought they were? So I think that, in a way, if that's what happens, or if that's how they attack it, there's a world where we talk about this as the best thing that could have ever happened to them. And I cited the 2000 Oregon State team, which went 11-1. It's the greatest team in school history, beat Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl, as everyone knows. That team barely squeaked by Eastern Washington in week 1.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes on to be the greatest, team in school history. You can survive a scare in week 1 and still win the Big Ten. I mean, you could go 0-3 in non-conference and still win the Big Ten, but you can look like that in week 1 and still be a national championship contender at the end of the season. But they've got a lot of work to do from where they started.
Yeah, I mean, Oregon traditionally, two things can be true. One, traditionally under Dan Lanning, they have come out and whooped opponents like this.
Sure. And that's not just Dan Lanning. I mean, I think it was something like they've played 16 FCS teams since 2002, and the average margin of victory has been 46 points. So there's every reason to expect an absolute, massacre
Yes. And the other thing that is true is that normally when they come out and they have a performance where it's maybe not quite what they wanted it to be, they normally come out in week 2 and whoop up again. So we'll see if we get the second version of normal this week with Boise State. We'll see what happens. But traditionally, that has been the case. Oregon has been able, under Dan Lanning, they have, a down week. They always come out the week after and are normally pretty on it. There's no letdown. There's no follow-up, loss or whatever. So hopefully we get that team come Saturday, to say the least. So,
yeah, you go back. I mean, obviously the Georgia game at the start of his tenure doesn't really count, but I remember after that game sitting in the post-game press conference in Atlanta, and Dan Lanning fielded questions about whether Bo Nix was still going to be his quarterback. It's as funny as that is in hindsight. Bo threw a couple of early interceptions, took them out of the game. It's like, hey, maybe Ty Thompson's the guy. Let's not overreact too much to week 1. And then also that same year, they lose to Washington at home, total heartbreaker. Well, what do they do the next week? They come out and they beat Utah at home in a really galvanizing victory at a point where it felt like the season was going to get completely out of hand.
With Bo Nix on one leg.
Right. Oregon State the next week obviously became a disaster in its own right. But that Utah win was a real high watermark of that season. Last year they lose to Washington. They come back and absolutely lay it on the Cougs, Washington State, the next weekend. So you're right. The Ducks have responded to adversity really, really well under Lanning. So I expect the same. It's just it is a step up in competition against Boise State. And it is you got to prove it. You got to prove that you're as good as everybody has thought you were and as good as you've told everyone you are. Yeah.
And I think at least watching Dan Lanning's press conference last night, it sounds like Bedford is going to be back this week. Mm-hmm. And that seems like that's a pretty big deal for that offensive line. So, because that was, easily, which is another shocking thing, by the way, because the offensive line under Dan Lanning has been so solid. Last year there were so many questions about that offensive line going into the season, and they answered all of them. So I think it was almost like a assumption of all of us that it was going to be the same this year. They had to replace 2 starters on that offensive line, one of which was the Remington Award winner and Jackson Powers Johnson. But, everybody kind of was like, oh, it'll be fine. And that was, to me, the position group that had definitely the worst Saturday. And so we'll see if Bedford coming back is going to be, what this team needs. But yeah, that's, that it's not, it was a very uncharacteristic offensive line night for Oregon. So that is the thing that I am most fascinated to see. The stat I keep hearing over and over again is that they allowed 5 sacks last season, and against Idaho, they allowed 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
and a fourth down stop. Was it just one fourth down stop? Yeah. Stopped on they were 1 for 3 on fourth down. And then also the fake punt. So if Matthew Bedford comes back, presumably you're shifting Poncho back to center and you no longer have a walk-on starting at center. No offense to him, but ideally you want to have your group that you thought you were going to have to start the season. Theoretically the Ducks would get back to having their preferred group. Now it's possible the preferred group isn't any better, but you at least want to see them at full strength before you fully judge them, as long as these aren't going to be long-term absences. But I think, you play like you did against Idaho, you deserve to take it on the chin for a little bit, and that's where you see it in the rankings. That's where you see it in kind of some of the overreactions, the questions that get asked. Brenna, I want to ask you, because I talked about this on the radio this morning a little bit with Dirt and Sprague, and then also had a reader write in, really putting a lot of this on not the result, but like basically calling out the Ducks for their marketing campaign, the swagger of the Big Ten. They had the ad campaign or the ad on Friday, I believe, which was all about the tradition of the Big Ten, and it showed a guy like cutting the grass with scissors to perfectly manicure the field, and then the duck comes buzzing out on his motorcycle, and he like carves donuts in the field until you get that perfect Oregon O on the field. And it says, like tradition's everything in the Big Ten. We'll try to measure up, or we'll try to respect it, or something like that. And then, obviously, all the things mighty different, just everything that sort of says like, basically like, we're going to win in a big way. Like we're going to win the national championship essentially. And then you come out and lay an egg against Idaho. All of that, I think, is fair game. But like, do they almost set themselves up for failure by like with the way they sort of project themselves, or do you still like it?
This is Oregon. Like, I don't know, what are they supposed to do? Like, are they not supposed to, have these campaigns? Like, that has nothing to do with the players in my eyes. The players aren't the ones writing the campaigns.
Sure. No. But like in terms of like let's say the Ducks start 1-2 somehow, catastrophically. You are setting yourselves up for just like a massive piling on.
But that's every program in the country.
Well, but nobody else is doing this the way, like, where's the Washington ad campaign? I'm not saying that this is, I'm not disagreeing with you, but like, there's no USC ad campaign, about like, the Big Ten. They just went out and beat LSU. Like, it's like, that's the ad campaign.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this is just take it how it is. Like, I think this is just what Oregon is. This is just what they do. And, sometimes that's going to bite them, and sometimes it's going to work out. But I just feel like this is kind of how Oregon has operated for years and years. And they've always kind of been the brash team that is mucking things up. Yeah. So, I don't know. I don't really see it. And I think that they do it. I mean, people are always going to find something to get upset about. So for me, I'm kind of just like, I don't know. That's just not something that really resonates with me personally. But I also, can recognize my biases as somebody who grew up an Oregon fan. And, say, look, for me, this is just what it is, and this is just normal. And for outside people, I can understand why it may be a problem, it's not like them losing some games is going to change how they do things. So, like, yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. I don't personally have an issue with it. Oregon's going to take it on the chin no matter what. Mm. And that's just how it is, and life moves on to me. But
so certainly it's the risk they take, right? By being brash, by being bold, that's the risk you take, that you are going to put yourself out there in a way, and then you're not going to meet that standard. Yeah. They're 1-0, and with still a very good chance to start 6-0 when Ohio State's in town. So let's not get too. Is it 6? Exactly. Is that 6? 5-0. 5-0 when Ohio State comes to town. So let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. That said, I think it's pretty funny. I think it's a little hilarious, and I think the jokes are funny. And in the same way, the jokes were funny when, Colorado started to just totally fall off a cliff last year after, all of the talk. I can appreciate the humor and the irony of those things. And I think that, Oregon probably deserves it for this week because of where they were at. As a program and as a brand, I don't think the players need to be piled on. I don't think we need to necessarily go that far, but as a program and a brand, I think we can have some fun with it because of the irony of it. But that said, like, yes, I'm a little less sure about them as a playoff and championship contender after what I saw on Saturday. But no, I'm not ringing the alarm that this is a full blown crisis. I think that there is a chance for them to redeem themselves against Boise State. That's going to be a win that I'm already counting it as a win. That's going to be a game where what happens is going to be a much better test of where this team actually is. So
They're going to play this podcast in Boise State's locker room now. Way to go, Bill.
I'm saying no. I'm giving the Broncos well. Yes, I understand what you're saying, but I'm giving the Broncos the respect of that is an actual test where we can actually learn things about the Ducks. And what I did write in the column on Saturday is, I think it's fair to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're not going to make this mistake again. Did they overlook Idaho? Obviously had to. Again, your average margin has been 46 points against FCS teams over 22 years. You beat Portland State last year, which is also from the Big Sky Conference, 81-7. This game is you're paying Idaho $740,000 to come and take a beating. Like, this game exists for a purpose on your schedule. That purpose is not to be a good tune-up for the college football playoff. It's not to test your fourth quarter resolve. It's not to be able to have, some like high pressure fourth down situations. It is to work out the kinks, put a lot of points on the board, and come out of it healthy. That's why you play this game. And Idaho, when this game was scheduled, was Idaho an FCS power? No, Idaho was still kind of back in transition and figuring out what it was after dropping back down to the FCS level. It has become, one of the finer programs in the FCS. And Jace Neck's done an incredible job there. They're extremely well coached. They're going to win a lot of games in the Big Sky Conference. They're not going to beat the University of Montana because they are not on the schedule for some reason, which,
what?
I just want to, right? Thank you. This is something that I will give just a very quick acknowledgement to. The Big Sky Conference in their conference schedule, for whatever reason, does not have Idaho and Montana facing each other. When we talk about great rivalries in college football and meaningful rivalries for however many years before Idaho went to, the bowl level and joined the WAC in the early 90s, Idaho-Montana was a very meaningful rivalry. It has a name. It's the Little Brown Jug. Little Brown Stein? I should know this.
It's
Little
Stein.
Brown Stein. Sorry.
I knew something was wrong.
The Stein is the jug is something else. Sorry. It's the Little Brown Stein. And it's, and then that was dormant for, 20 years, 25 years. And then back in the FCS, those games have been great the last few years. Like, they didn't play each other for a long time. And then those last few games have been great. That rivalry has some heat again. They're both top levels programs. Montana's 4th right now in the FCS rankings. Idaho's 7th. How do you not play that game every year? Like, that needs to be a staple the same way Montana State is a staple.
Okay, so we're going to get deep in Big Sky weeds here. But each team in the Big Sky has 2 protected rivalry games, at least from the last – I haven't really been paying attention to the Big Sky the last 2 years, like in terms of how things work.
Eastern and Montana Montana would have the Eastern game, Eastern Washington protected, and the Montana State game.
I guess Montana has Eastern Washington protected, but no, that doesn't make any sense either. It
needs to be Idaho, and I'm a student of the Montana Eastern Washington rivalry. That is a rivalry as well.
I can tell you why it isn't Idaho.
Idaho is a bigger game.
I can tell you why it isn't Idaho, because Idaho has Eastern and Idaho State protected. So that is why it is not Idaho. However, I feel like Portland State is one that's protected for Eastern. So yeah, anyways, I'd have to look at all the protected games to actually know this. But I think the reason why, now that I think about it, Montana and Idaho is not one of those protected 2 games for each of those programs. And
would you like to know what I think of that?
He's not a fan.
I'm not. I wasn't going to say it's really reasonable, and you've convinced me, and it makes perfect sense. No, it's dumb. Like,
but what game would you?
Rivals, I don't think you need to have 2 protected games. I think that is a stupid and arbitrary standard. Like, play the games that have. If you have a million years of history and you have a trophy that they carve the result of the game each year into, that game needs to be played. Like, don't have arbitrary dumb standards. Like, have a way to make your rules work for your schools and your programs. Just make it work in a way that is actually honoring the product you have.
Thank you for attending Brenna and Bill's Big Sky Corner. It is, we're here every week. We're here every week. I'm sure this will not be the first nor the last. Well, definitely isn't this is the first of this year, but this will definitely not be the last time that you hear us randomly ranting about Big Sky football on this podcast. Oh, I'm so glad we could provide an education for the fine people who are listening who may not be aware of the rules of Big Sky football. Should we talk about Oregon State?
I was going to say the exact same words, so good for you. We should talk about Oregon State because, I think you can come away from the Oregon State game feeling like happy and sad at the same time, to quote Casey Musgraves. Like, I think the Beavers did what they needed to do against the Bengals. It wasn't 81-7, but it was, it did the job. And the most encouraging takeaways, I think, were obviously the run game. You had 300 plus yards from Anthony Hankerson and Jam Griffin. Giovanni McCoy, it did what he needed to do. Had one absolutely glorious touchdown pass to David Wells Jr. Play of the game, obviously, where he floated it, 50 yards where only Wells could catch it and led and guided him into the end zone. Just a beautiful pass and double coverage. After a really shaky start, in that first quarter, I don't know that there was a whole lot to glean from that game. It went from that point on, I would say, mostly how you would have expected it to go. What did you think?
Yeah. It was just, all camp, there was a lot of talk about those running backs and how good they were. So it was nice to actually see that come to fruition and, have those two both kind of have their day. And especially since, that running backs room, first of all, individually it's been through a lot. And then as a group, they've been through a lot. You have the whole Damian Martinez saga last year. Or I guess not last year. I guess technically it was in this calendar year, but you understand what I'm saying. During spring ball, he leaves. You have, you have Jam, who was with the program, went to another program, came back, and just all of that. So I'm sure, unfortunately, I walked in midway through the running backs press conference, which is like the worst time to walk into a press conference because you don't know what's been asked before you.
Sure.
So you don't want to repeat. You're like, oh God. But, looking back on the press conference, I wish I would have been like, how did today feel for you, Jam, after, everything that you've been through? And same with Anthony, he hadn't scored a rushing touchdown in almost to the day 11 months. The last time he had a rushing touchdown before Saturday was September 30th, 2023. So he did have one receiving touchdown against the Beavers last year, ironically. But yeah, it was just very pleasing to see those two shine. It's still got a lot of questions about, and I don't know if it's really through any fault of his own, but we're still learning things about Giovanni McCoy.
Totally.
I don't really know if that game really gave us any, other than that touchdown pass, which was lovely, beautiful. Shout out to my photographer, Brian Watkins, who, got a phenomenal shot of that touchdown pass right there. But yeah, you just don't, I don't know if we really learned anything about quarterbacks in that game. And in that situation, it's probably okay considering what your running backs were doing. But at some point, you're going to need quarterback play. So,
completely agree. Giovanni McCoy was 9 of 10 passing.
Yes,
he should have been 10 for 10 because the only incompletion was a pass across the middle to Trent Walker that was on the numbers. And that was a big play. It would have gone for a lot of yards. Trent Walker, who caught everything in fall camp, and is seen as a huge playmaker for them, kind of, in the making, with an uncharacteristic drop. Otherwise, we're talking about him being a perfect 10 for 10. So, and it's funny, the difference between 9 of 10 and 10 of 10, I recognize is very minimal, but I think we would be heralding Giovanni McCoy in a much bigger way if he had been perfect. I understand that we're only talking about 10 passes, which isn't a huge sample size, but you go 10 for 10 and your running backs, go for 380 yards or whatever it is, all told. That's a pretty flawless offensive day. The Beavers did fumble it a few times. There were 3 fumbles. They lost the one off from Jam in the first quarter. The snap out of the back of the end zone, you hope that that's an early wrinkle, or just an early season jitters. But I think that to your point, the Beavers have better players than Idaho State. Of course they do. Idaho, which played Oregon, right, is a good football team. At its level, that is a good football team.
Yes.
The players are not as good as the players Oregon has, but that is a good football team with good players who know how to play. I'm sorry, Cody Hawkins. Idaho State is not a good football team. Historically, traditionally, they're working on it, but that is not a good football team at its own level. So,
and I do not remember the last time it was.
I mean, I looked, I wrote this down. I don't have it at the top of my head, but they have had more 1-win seasons in the last 20 plus years than they've had winning seasons. So they've had 3 winning seasons and 5 1-win seasons.
Yeah.
It is just a bad football program. And that hasn't yet changed under Cody Hawkins. Maybe it will, but it hasn't changed yet. And so what do you learn from Oregon State? Winning really comfortably? Not a lot. And I don't think we know yet if Oregon State has better players in the same way against better teams. Are we certain that Oregon State has better players than San Diego State? I think so. They should. That said, Sean Lewis is a very well thought of coach. It takes time to come in and start a program and kind of rebuild. But, are we sure Oregon State's going to beat San Diego State on the road this weekend? I think they will. But are we sure? I mean, I didn't learn enough about Oregon State in week 1 to be able to say definitively, I'm this is a team this would be a top of the Mountain West team if they were actually in that conference. It's Boise State, Oregon State. I don't know that because I didn't see enough. If everybody in the Mountain West was sort of like Idaho State, absolutely. But again, you shouldn't really learn a lot about a team in their opener against an FCS program. We learned too much about Oregon. We learned more about Oregon than we wanted to learn against Idaho. You should not leave those games with questions.
Yeah.
Oregon State, did what it needed to do, and it got to week 2. And everything I said about what Oregon wanted out of the Idaho game is what Oregon State got out of the Idaho State game, which is they got through it healthy. They were able to sort of establish their identity and, show that the bread and butter works, work out some kinks, snap the ball out of the back of the end zone. That's your 1. And you move on to week 2. So, the Beavers obviously had a much more productive week 1, I would say, than Oregon. But we're also judging them against very different standards at this point.
Yeah, that's a good point that we shouldn't learn anything about a team against an FCS opponent. I think that's very, very salient. So hopefully we learn more this week down at San Diego State, a team that's also not very good.
Right. The Beavers did struggle with SDSU last year in Corvallis. If you remember that game, that was DJ had some picks and they couldn't pull away, and they ended up winning by 10.
Oh, DJ
kind of felt like the Idaho game a little bit, where it's the Beavers were so much better, but they just weren't putting points on the board. Which I don't know. The DJU experience, I guess.
All I got to say is that Jonathan Smith must be a miracle worker, baby.
That is the takeaway, right? For as much as people and I know that some of the hardcore Beaver fans, love to complain about Brian Lindgren, the offensive coordinator, and the play calling at Oregon State. Man, they made DJ. Listen, DJ, long career, has done a lot of good things. But the guy that you're seeing at Florida State right now versus what they got out of him last year with the Beavers, very different things. Much more productive quarterback. No, he still missed a lot of receivers at OSU, though. Yeah. I will say, you watch DJ and you're if you could put it just within 4 feet of your, like a radius of like 6 feet of your receiver, you know, your numbers would be so much better. Sorry. Getting over a cold. So I don't know. You know, the Beavers are obviously in a new frontier of quarterbacking. And I do wonder a little bit how DJ feels about where he ended up. I was a little surprised, by the way. I don't think we've talked about DJ on this podcast yet. I was a little surprised he went back to the ACC and went back to such a high level program. And I understand, like, I mean, why not? You want to play at the highest level, and, you know, he's trying to get to the NFL. I think coming off of last year, I'm like, that guy is for sure going to play in the NFL. Not because he's going to be a high draft pick or because, you know, he has shown that he's ready to be a starter in the NFL, but because he has all the tools and makes coaches believe that they can, you know, get him over the top to be the player that he was supposed to be coming out of high school. I mean, Florida State, I don't know that was, I don't know. I mean, he obviously hasn't been good enough for them, like at their level and what they needed.
Yeah.
You know, that's a significant change to go from Jordan Travis to DJ. Well, DJ would be a really good Mountain West quarterback. Like if he'd gone to Fresno State, if he'd gone to Hawaii, if he'd gone to, you know, Nevada or Colorado State, SDSU, like, I don't know. I think that might've been a better move for him, but I hope he's able to turn it around, because otherwise, I mean, being a punching bag for that fan base when a season has gone completely off the rails is
being a punching bag for everyone.
Well, that's true. And for multiple fan bases, really, because
yes.
I mean, Clemson fans are enjoying it. You know, I've seen a pretty clear split among Beaver folks, you know, because I think there's a real appreciation for the fact that DJ chose Oregon State, right?
Yep.
Like, I mean, players had not done that, you know, to say you're a former 5-star recruit, you know, you were the starter at Clemson, you're a household name in college football, and you chose to come to Corvallis. That was really validating for the Beavers and where they were and Jonathan Smith's trajectory and program. So I think there's a real appreciation for that. I've seen some piling on from Beaver fans, and then you immediately see the backlash from other Beaver fans, which has been interesting. But like I said, you don't want to be the guy who everybody pins, you know, a program, you know, cratering on. So I hope that he's able to find some redemption this season.
I do wonder how much of a help it was last year too, to just like have his family be so close by. I mean,
sure.
You know, you have Mateo just down the street, down the freeway. And so I think his family was just a little bit more present probably last year than what they can be now for him. And it seems like that was a really, really big thing. So that's something that kind of resonates for me a little bit. But yeah, like, I mean, everybody knew at the end of the year that like the DJU experiment was done. And I do wonder if everything that happened to the Pac-12 hadn't happened, and Oregon State was still playing in it and all that sort of stuff, you know, would DJ still be the starter in Corvallis right now? Or would it be Aiden? You know, that's an interesting what if to me, because it definitely, Aiden was coming on a little bit.
Did you watch Michigan State last week?
Yeah, I know it wasn't great. But you do have to remember different situations. I mean, Michigan State's
sure.
They've got a ladder to climb. Let's put it that way. So yeah, Aiden definitely had some growing pains, but yeah, it's just an interesting hypothetical in my brain of, you know, what would this look like this year if DJ was still here and this was still the team that they could have been, you know? So anyway, it's just as a thought exercise, it's something I thought about too. If Jonathan Smith stays, you know, the Pac-12 still exists, you know, I think one of those quarterbacks would be gone. And if you're Jonathan Smith trying to keep your, you know, you want to continue climbing, right? Yep.
You've got to hand the keys over to Aiden Childs and invest in his future. So I think in that scenario, my bet is that DJ was kind of gone either way.
Yeah.
And maybe if Jonathan was still here, it would have required a little bit more of a nudge, like maybe DJ wouldn't have been as eager to leave. Because I think that I think he liked playing in the system. I think he had a good experience,
Yeah.
He certainly had a better season than the way it ended at Clemson. But
I think it's safe to say 2 games in,
it was time for the Beavs to transition.
I think it's safe to say 2 games in that his season at Oregon State will easily be the best season of his collegiate career. I do not see this taking a wild turn and him all of a sudden finding a ton of success down the stretch or something like that.
Pray for Joe Freeman, our Beavers reporter, who is a lifelong Florida State supporter.
Oh, rough. Sorry, Joe.
It is good. It is good though, Brenna, despite the more fireworks than we expected, or fireworks not the right word. Like, we have more to talk about after week 1 than I think we really expected to have, especially on the Ducks front. But it is good to have college football back. And I also appreciate that we had 6 straight nights of college football. I guess 5 straight nights of college football: Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. We have been inundated with college football. You had USC and LSU, and then Florida State. I mean, it's like they've really stretched the week 1 calendar, the week 1,
I love it.
the week 1 calendar. So we've gotten ourselves fully taken care of. Xfinity and the Big Ten Network still not resolved, and now you can add a Disney and DirecTV dispute to it. So our friends with DirecTV Stream are now panicking over not having ESPN. But college football is back. There are places to watch it, and it's a welcome change after a long summer. So I'm glad we're back. I'm glad we have things to talk about. I'm glad that you're doing your thing. For those who missed it, Brenna is not just reporting for KOIN from these games. When Oregon State is home, she is handling the post game on the CW. So she was down there on the sidelines today.
Let's clarify that. So yes, I am.
Let me build you up.
I appreciate it.
Okay, fine.
But I'm going to be honest too. So so we do. So basically, the CW has their own post game interview, and then we are doing post game shows out of the vast majority of the Beaver home games that are on the CW. And once the CW is off the air, then I get a second player to come with me and be live with me, because I would have loved to have gone live with Jam and Anthony on Saturday, but they'd already been live on the broadcast, so therefore I had Skylar Thomas with me. So
with the big first quarter interception, Skylar Thomas, huge difference maker for Oregon State in the secondary. So I don't know. I think you got just as important of a player. But my point is, Brenna, that you're going to be a staple on the sideline of Beaver games and on the CW this year. So Beaver fans will see plenty of you on the C-Dub. Do we call it the C-Dub?
Sure, let's call it the C-Dub. I'm down with that.
On the C-Dub, which is rad. And with that, on that note, I think we're going to get out of here. We're going to let this Idaho win. It was a win for those who have forgotten. We're going to let the Idaho win marinate a little bit more, and then more potatoes on Saturday with Boise State coming to town. By the way, shout out the Idaho Falls Spud Kings, Junior League Hockey in Idaho Falls. Since we've got such a big Idaho theme around us, every Division I football program in the state of Idaho will have played in Oregon in a 7-day span. Wow. We're gonna get the research team on when the last time that happened might have been.
That's a great use of resources. You should look that up.
I want to tag Elias on Twitter and just be like, Elias Sports Bureau, when was the last time that all 3 Division I programs in the state of Idaho played in Oregon within 1 week of each other? Okay, Brenna, thank you so much for taking the time on this fine Tuesday. We'll be back next week. We'll be talking about I don't know. Maybe we'll need to do like a panic meter on the Ducks and Beavers next week. Give it a score. Going to be curious to see where you rank the Ducks after this weekend. Are they going up? Are they going back down?
That depends on what the Ducks do and what everyone else does. So
I wasn't actually asking. I was setting it up for some intrigue. I wasn't like, tell us. Like, of course it depends. All right, Brenna and I are out of here. Thank you for listening. Continue to read the Oregonian and Oregon Live. Obviously, read my Bill Oram's Big Ten column weekly. Comes out on Mondays. We actually dropped it on Sunday this week because there was so much to get out. And then if you have questions for a mailbag, hit me on Twitter at Bill Oram or send them to boram@oregonian.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back next week.